Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Before the pandemic, Stephen Skybell starred for 2 years as Tevye in the rapturously acclaimed Yiddish production of Fiddler on the Roof, for which he received the 2019 Lucille Lortel Award for Outstanding Performance by a Lead Actor in a Musical. He played Laser Wolf in the 2016 Broadway production of Fiddler and has also starred on Broadway in Wicked, The Full Monty, Pal Joey, and Love, Valor, Compassion. His numerous off-Broadway appearances include Love's Labor's Lost and Antigone in New York, for which he earned an Obie Award. He has extensive Shakespearean credits and was one of 2 Americans chosen for the inaugural season of Shakespeare's Globe in London. He has taught acting at NYU, Juilliard, Harvard, ART, Fordham, and Yale School of Drama, from which he holds an MFA. And on a very personal note, I was blessed to play Chava to his Tevye in our college production of Fiddler way back in 1983. I had to say it.
Of course.
Zalmen Mlotek is an internationally recognized authority on Yiddish folk and theater music. It's thanks to his vision as artistic director of the National Yiddish Theatre Folksbiene that the Yiddish Fiddler was reborn. With Joel Grey as its director, Fiddler received so many awards and nominations during its incredible 2-year run downtown and then off-Broadway. It's incredible, and if you haven't seen it, you have the gift of being able to see it again.
A Fiddler Affendach. Meshuggah, nein? Aber bei uns in Anatevke ist jeder einer ein Fiddler Affendach.
Tradition, 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 Tradition.
Mach de Käuse, darf genau a Kreuze, schieß am Masel jeden. Was wir sind da. Es hat der Poli, was der Mechatolim, durch ein Michelina, Masel die Geschah. Mit Masel und mit Broche und ewig Jesus soll hier sein. Und heute der Masel ist nicht bei uns, nach was ist bei uns, alle drei.
Mlotek brought Yiddish klezmer music to off-Broadway and Broadway stages with the Tony-nominated Those Were the Days and the Drama Desk-nominated America, the Golden Land. Zalmen's music can be heard in more than 24 recordings and films. He has taught and performed across the world and worked with countless renowned performers, including Jan Pierce, Theodore Bickel, and Mandy Patinkin. He received his musical training at the Juilliard School of Music and studied under Leonard Bernstein. Welcome. That's a lot.
I'm nervous
You
now.
guys haven't accomplished very much.
Yes.
It's kind of a shonda. So glad to have you both. You can tell I'm a fangirl, or I'm fangirling. But let's just start with why another Fiddler, because frankly there have been a lot of them. And even though the Yiddish idea sounds wonderful, and now we know in hindsight it was a brilliant idea, many could have said, I'm going to start with you, Zalmen, like it's a tricky thing with the language to mount this Fiddler right now.
Yes, well, I had first heard the recording of the Yiddish Fiddler when they did it in Israel, and we got the recording in my home. And I think as a teenager, studying music and wanting to be a conductor, I heard this music and it kind of landed in my head. And as I took over the reins of the National Yiddish...
Now, before, when it landed in your head, this is 1964?
1966,
65.
I want to probably.
Right, the Broadway was 1964, and then I think the
That's
Yiddish,
right.
and it didn't last very long.
No, the Yiddish version did not do well in Israel. The Hebrew version, I think, lasted a year, but they did do a recording. And it was this recording, I think, that for me, hearing this score that I had already known from the original, hearing it in Yiddish just, for me, landed in my head, and I said, okay, one day I'm going to do it. And when I, fast forward to a couple of years ago, when we had the resources to do it, I said, well, if we're going to do it, it has to be comparable in terms of what an audience has now expected of Fiddler from the movie, from the Broadway show. So it had to be presented on a first-class production. So I thought of who would be at the helm, and
that was Joel Grey.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to people like Hal Prince and Sheldon Harnick.
Hal Prince was the original director. Sheldon Harnick is the co-writer.
Original
Prince is the producer. Jerry
Original
Robbins.
producers, correct.
Right.
And Hal, who had worked with Joel in Cabaret, said, "Have you thought of Joel?" And I said, "Well, I didn't."
But why is Cabaret to Fiddler an obvious leap?
It's not. It's really
knowing Joel.
It's Joel's connection with it. Hal Prince had invited Joel to see it in Washington before it opened in New York.
To see Fiddler.
So when I called Joel, he said, I actually asked him to play Tevye. I said, would you be interested in playing Tevye or directing it?
Does that hurt you? Does it hurt your feelings?
No. but he wrote back, I'm interested in directing it. Let's talk.
Fantastic.
And I was, excited.
You have great history, personal family history, in Yiddish theater, Yiddish music. Can you just give us a little bit of a snapshot of what you grew up with? It was your first language.
Yes, it was my first language. My father was escaped Poland in 1939 in September. He was a Yiddish writer at that time. He traveled to Shanghai, where he lived the war years. He was in touch with Americans because that was where everyone wanted to go. And his reputation had preceded him. He was a writer. His writings were seen. And he got a visa to teach Yiddish in Calgary. And my mother was born here, but also born in a Yiddish-speaking home, was a musician, a pianist, and loved Yiddish folk songs.
And I read or heard you say that she was considered the Sherlock Holmes of Yiddish music.
Yes.
Why is that?
She had an encyclopedic memory. So in her work, she was 50 years the archivist at the YIVA Institute. So thousands and thousands of songs would come through her experience, and she would know exactly who wrote it, where it was first performed, who performed it, and
Wow.
it was kind of an amazing access that she had. And it was this home that I grew up in.
Amazing. And Stephen, did you have Yiddish? I mean, I know that you studied it on your own, but
Right.
it wasn't like you were fluent at all.
Not at all. I grew up in a small Texas town, Lubbock, Texas, but my grandfather, my father's father and mother lived in that town with us, and so I heard them speak Yiddish, but for like many people of my generation, they spoke it so we wouldn't know what they were saying. So we didn't learn Yiddish, but we heard Yiddish. So I would say I had it in my ear, but that certainly didn't make me feel confident enough to say I'm a Yiddish speaker at all.
And so when this audition, I think you learned that they were mounting this production. Was
Yes.
it on social
They announced
media?
it on Facebook of all places, and I never ever pursue a role because for an actor that's really heartbreak. If you're like, I really want that, but I did make an inquiry about who would they be. Is Tevye available? And they say it's not true anymore, but I was told Tevye's already taken. But that person this is what I was told by my agent, that person is reconsidering the Yiddish challenge. So I said to my agent, well, tell them, one, I've worked with Joel Grey before, which was true, he directed me in a play in 2015, and two, I speak Yiddish, and that was not true. But I had studied Yiddish. I had at that point taken formal Yiddish classes.
And why did you do that?
Well, it was a long-going process. The real reason, Zalmen asked me that when I first met him at the audition. He's like, "Why do you have Yiddish?" But the truth is that I was bar mitzvahed in Lubbock, Texas, as was my brother, and I just knew in my heart of hearts I did not want to ever lose my knowledge of the Hebrew letters, and so rather than try to learn modern Hebrew or biblical Hebrew, I knew there was a wealth of Yiddish music and Yiddish theater, and I thought, well, my brother and I thought, well, maybe we should learn Yiddish. Let's learn Yiddish together. And so we tried that for a while. We did that for a while with our own little grammar book. And then in 2006, I was in Chicago, and I contacted Northwestern, and I said, can I please audit the Yiddish class? And unfortunately, they didn't have a large enough enrollment for the Yiddish class to go. So the professor, Hannah Fagel-Turteltaub, who saw our Yiddish fiddler but has since sadly passed away, she was a bit of a luminary in the Yiddish world, offered to teach me privately in her home, which I spent a summer going to her home once a week and learning Yiddish with her. So that gave me enough chutzpah to feel like I could audition for the Yiddish fiddler.
And what did you audition with?
Well, I auditioned, they sent you tapes. So, and I remember they said on the audition material, do yourself a favor, do us a favor, listen to the tapes. So I was like, they're not fooling around. So it was a little bit of nothing completely, which was interesting to me, a little bit of Rich Man in Yiddish, and a little bit of the opening of the musical in Yiddish, and then a little bit of the Laser Wolf scene in Yiddish.
And I remember you saying in one interview that there was a line that you gave people to say.
Yes.
Can you tell us what line that was?
Yes, it was. Equity allowed us to audition with one line, and the line that we came up with, Muttel Didner, my associate who was the Yiddish coach, we came up with was "Willst du versuchen mein Geschmacken Zimmes?" Right? So it has a lot of the chuz and the kuz.
That's hard.
Yes, we picked it on purpose.
Do it one more time.
"Willst du versuchen mein Geschmacken Zimmes?"
Which means?
Do you want to taste my delicious Zimmes?
Of course.
Right.
And so didn't a lot of people fail that test?
Many people failed it. When we announced that we were casting for Fiddler with Joel Grey, we had thousands, literally thousands. We auditioned 700 people. We saw many, many tests.
And this was for 26 roles, am I right?
For 29 at the time, yeah. We saw many Tevyes. And yes, there was a Tevye that we were considering.
Now there was.
And you can't tell us on JBS?
No, we can't tell you. But
We don't want to know.
But the Yiddish was impossible. The Yiddish was impossible. And we tried it, and we worked with him for a couple of days, and it was impossible. Stephen walked in, and I just remember us looking at each other, just in kind of...
Who's us?
Joel, myself, Muttel, and... wowed us.
What was the look? The look was, this is our guy. This is our Tevye.
Yeah, it was immediate. We knew it.
And why? And he has to just take it.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to hear how wonderful you are when you're sitting there.
Yeah,
it was, first of all, the Yiddish wasn't an issue, right? We heard right away that the Yiddish wasn't going to be an issue. But more than that, it was the actor. It was seeing this brilliant man thinking about this text, knew the role, knew the character, and just wowed us.
And it's so fresh to see Stephen doing it. I mean, that's part of what I felt, is that this is a different fiddler. It's a different Tevye. It's a different Rich Man. You know, so many of these things are codified in our memories, and we treasure them. We actually don't want to let go of the way Zero sings a certain, bitty bitty bum.
Yeah.
But suddenly you let go, and you're just in this new thing. How daunting is it to take on these iconic, whether it's Topol or it's Zero?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, the blessing of our Yiddish fiddler is that I got to do it in Yiddish, so that I didn't have any kind of sonic comparison to the recording, the Mostel recording or the movie. So I felt a little freer to forge my own way. But I still, I mean, it's interesting to even hear you say that it was fresh and new, because in some ways it's not that I'm trying to do what they did, but I do feel like I'm just trying to do the material as they did the material. That is, we all are just trying to do it. So we're bound to put our individual stamp on it. But definitely having the Yiddish was a way to just, in some way, bypass comparisons.
And this is what Sholem Aleichem wrote in. Are we right? So,
Yeah.
Correct.
So it's not that it's suddenly some arbitrary
No.
kind of Jewish lens. This was sort of how it was meant to be.
And there's actually, in the translation that Shraga Friedman did in Israel, he actually, lifted.
Pulls things from Sholem Aleichem
Yes.
that are not in the Broadway version, but really just massage the text with real Sholem Aleichem references. I mean, If I Were a Rich Man is called If I Were a Rothschild, and he wrote a story called If I Were a Rothschild. So changing it to Rothschild is blessing from Sholem Aleichem, but also for me, it makes it much more set in time, because Tevye would know who the Rothschilds were and would admire them and esteem them and desire to be like them.
Right, and have an aspiration to be that rich. Teaching it seems very difficult to me. Like, how are the actors absorbing it? Are they just essentially memorizing a sound, or are they understanding every word? Help us understand.
I just want to say that it takes somebody with an extraordinarily good ear. So that you have to have an extraordinarily good ear so that you can hear it, so you can hear the difference. So it's very subtle differences in terms of a word. But
Wait, you said so you can hear the difference. What difference?
the difference.
Like, give an example.
I don't know, like let's say, even though a word like araycher man, right? So there's stuff involved there,
It's
right?
hard.
In English, it's spelled Raykher. Now, someone could look at that first and say, okay, that's Rayker, right? Remember, it's Raykher. First of all, so we tell them that AY is always I. So that's the first thing. But the very first thing is the R. It's not a Reicher man, right? It's a Reicher man. There's a very big difference when you hear it. Even if you don't understand the language, you can hear that Reicher isn't the Yiddish that.
I watched you were playing Sunrise Sunset, and you put the words up on a Zoom interview you did and said we could follow along. And I was paralyzed. It was so hard. I just couldn't.
to follow the words.
I couldn't even approximate it.
Yeah.
I'm saying, even when I see something and then hear it, it's just so hard to work
No, it's
with.
challenging.
So back to my question of how did you practice it?
Well, I mean, the thing is, and we just came from rehearsal today for the revival, and we have our Yiddish Mottel is there coaching us constantly, even now with the Yiddish. And we're fine-tuning it, and we're making sure that things haven't gone askew since we've not been performing it. But the thing I loved about doing Yiddish, because as you said, I love Shakespeare as well, and there's a similarity for me, a similar muscle, which is Shakespeare is sort of a foreign language to the modern ear. And so we, as a Shakespearean actor, have to make sure that we know what we're saying and can convey it truthfully and honestly and make it seem like this is our vernacular, this Shakespeare language. So it's the same thing with the Yiddish, is that first of all, you listen to how it's being on the tape or motto. I'm not afraid. I want him to give me a line reading. I want him to help me know this is the operative word.
This is the emphasis.
Yeah, but also along the lines like, this is part of the action. This is where you're making your point, or here's where you're changing your mind. So all of that wants to be, it is acting 101, which is I have to know how the script serves me and what I want to get. And then the real bane of my existence was in rehearsal realizing I not only have to know what I'm saying, I have to know what everyone is saying to me. I can't just sit there and wait for, that's my cue. So it's like I have to know their Yiddish and have to know what they're saying. So when that was made clear to me, it was like, this is acting. You have to know what you're saying, and you have to know what's being said to you and feel how it moves through that. So
And then I understand that Joel Grey wanted to rehearse in English
yes,
first.
still
So-
does, still does.
Still does, because he doesn't have the Yiddish.
He says that, but he,
How confusing is that, or how helpful is that?
it's helpful. It was so helpful, but very helpful. And we would
Does that mean you have to also know all your lines in English?
Well, so that's where it gets tricky, because back in the day when we did it initially, I would just default to the Broadway version, which I knew in my head just because one knows it. Now, because I'm a little more comfortable with the Yiddish, I am trying to do the English, which is the translation of the Yiddish, as opposed to just default to the Broadway, because there are differences. And in working with different actors, we just want to really mine the differences that are in the Yiddish script. So it's a bit of a mind bend.
Yeah. Zalmen, tradition, just as an example, can you just talk about the arc of the word, how you played with it, or decided the Sheldon Harnick discussion?
The original translation of a tradition that Shraga Friedman chose was Die Teure, the Torah. That was
so Shraga Friedman is the first one to
translate it in '65. And
the
Torah, and I thought,
like basically the Jewish law.
That's right.
That's how we live.
Right, and from there comes tradition.
Everything
so that's how he saw it, and I thought it was brilliant. And
the first time I read it, I broke into tears. You know, that you read Die Teure, and then you make that step. That's the tradition.
Right.
However, Sheldon Harnick,
the composer, the
writer, the lyricist, who did not have that connection with that word, he asked me, "What is that word? It sounds Japanese, Toro, you know." So, and he came to a rehearsal. I invited him to the first rehearsal, and after the rehearsal, he called me and said, "What's that word that they're singing?" And he had already spoken with Alyssa Stein, who did know some Yiddish, the widow of Joe Stein, who wrote the book. And they were having this discussion. What is that word? Well, so she told him, well, there is a word, traditia, right? So when he spoke to me, he asked me, what is there another word? So I told him about Mesora. Mesora is a word of tradition, right? And traditia. And he says, traditia. That's what I want to hear. So that's what and I had already taught it to the cast, that we were already a week,
so they had to unlearn.
Yeah, so yeah.
We were a week in. We could do that.
Right.
But was that a loss for you? I mean, do you feel...
No, not such a big loss. I mean, it was, it was a gift to have, and it is a gift to have Sheldon around. To have him at the performances and to give us his blessings on it. So I felt like, okay, this is what the writer wants. I have to honor it.
And Stephen, what do you? I know it's hard to say because I know you're in the moment when you're doing it, but is there one particular song in the Yiddish that you just like love to do, that you look forward to doing?
Well, that is a hard question, and it probably is not fair to ask. But I would say Rich Man, I love Rich Man, one, because it starts with a bit of an off-kilt, like saying if I were a Rothschild. And so I love that about it, but I also love, there's just little tweakings about it. Again, back to Tzimmus. The English, the Sheldon Harnick is, I see my wife, my gold, they're looking like a rich man's wife, supervising meals to her heart's delight. And in the Yiddish, it says, she makes a Tzimmus even on a weekday. So that kind of specificity is
Can you just say it in Yiddish? Is that hard?
No, that's hard. I can't do that. Okay, thank you. But then I just want to make a point, just so we don't scare anyone who might be watching this, that we do have super titles.
Right. Everything is.
So even though you hear Teure or Traditia, it's going to say tradition, and so you're going to know where you are.
And the fact that you have Russian subtitles too. What was that decision?
It was based. We decided years ago when we realized that there was a big Russian community in New York that would appreciate it. That would that for them English was not the language that they would necessarily appreciate hearing, but to see it in Russian. So
it's also amazing the experience of the subtitles, and I'm sure you've heard this. There's some theatricality that kind of is both incredibly helpful and integrated. It's not like you're suddenly like, there's the translation in front of me.
Yeah.
It feels like it's woven into the fabric of the set, of the experience. It's not taking you out.
Good.
Yeah, that was the design. We had wonderful designers who absolutely wanted to integrate it. Originally, we had it on top of the proscenium, but when we moved uptown, they changed it to doing it on the side.
And I remember you, Zalmen, were a little bit startled by the kind of minimalism of the set at first.
I was first invited to the...
Like, where's the set?
Right, the Joel and Beowulf Borrett and Annie Ward, they were meeting and privately about how, conceiving how this Fiddler is going to be different, and they showed me a diorama of what the set looked like, and I remember thinking to myself, that's it, that's the whole thing, and then they started to explain to me how this stage just covered with parchment and one word on the set, Tevye, just is all they need, because what they were going for, what Joel was going for and is going for, is the essence of the text, of the story. And that's his work even today, even after people have done it. He's going through the text, word by word, scene by scene, so that the essence, the honesty of the moment is there.
So the outpouring, the reaction to this, and again, put humility aside. I know you're humble, but I felt that people were sobbing, people went back. This, talk about it being accessible, the language is foreign to most people, even for those like me who feel like it's in our DNA somewhere. How do you explain the reaction?
Well, I mean, I've said it more than once that we are dealing with Fiddler on the Roof, and we know that it is a bona fide classic. So as long as we didn't get in its way, it has its own power. The thing about the Yiddish, I know this is from my own reaction when I first read it. It unlocks something. It just does. To know that it's the language that these characters, I mean, I suppose it would be Molière in French or Chekhov in Russian. You just know that it is the vernacular of these characters. And so there's a certain authority to that. And I think people respond to that. And Joel was always insistent that it be simple and true, and Fiddler has its birth in the Borscht Belt and vaudeville, and it's got great humor in it. But he wanted us to really find that for its truth rather than ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum. And we did that. And the sad truth, and it's even equally true now that we're reviving it, because we talk about Kiev in the musical, and we talk about Odessa, so it's clear that Sholem Aleichem imagined this story. The fictional town of Anatevka is in Ukraine, and that is the landscape of this story. And when we did the show before, we had the shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue, and anti-Semitism was already showing its head not only in Brooklyn, but in America as well. And so even if you think of Fiddler as a tale about a time way back then, it's proving sadly that it still is it's a needful story to hear, and I think people are responding to that. They're laughing, but they also, the final act of the musical goes out to a global landscape, and we see that intolerance is happening and people are being pushed around and being forced to leave their homes. And I think people respond very deeply to that.
Zalmen, can you say a little bit more about doing Fiddler in this moment?
Yeah, it's precisely that why we decided with this revival to create a educational initiative where we have raised funds to bring Jewish and non-Jewish students to come to come see the show, from middle school to college, preparing them with text, preparing them with a Zoom conversation, preparing them with reading material for the teachers, a whole study guide, and because we feel that that besides an introduction to the Broadway musical, besides this classic, it is so important today for non-Jews, especially non-Jews, to see this world that we Jews came from. And sadly today, with what's going on in the news, how relevant and important it is.
In a sense, timeless.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Stephen, I know you have said this has changed you, this part and this experience, and particularly when it comes to your own Jewish connection, or almost a sense of Jewish responsibility. Can you speak to that?
Well, I've never been shy about admitting in the business that I'm Jewish, and yet now I'm so proud to be playing a Jew on the stage, and I, in some ways, would be happy only to do that. I'm certainly happy playing Tevye. I mean, so in terms of my Jewishness, again, with Zalmen's help, with Joel's help, Zalmen helped me really sprinkle the role with some real Yiddishkeit. So we have brachas, and just to add a real truth to moments, and I loved that and really savor that. In terms of making how it's changed my life as a performer, Tevye is like a Shakespearean role in the length of it and the depth of it and the complexity of it. It really teaches you as an actor how to calibrate your energy and how to survive a 3-hour musical.
How much of that are you off stage?
Well, the joke was when I first was coaching with Motel and we were doing Act 1, I'd be like, he's still on stage. Literally Act 1 very rarely leaves the stage.
Wow.
And that's a real challenge.
Marathon.
Yeah. And Act 2, it's a little more spotty. So Act 2 is obviously much more challenging emotionally, but it is a bit of a breather in terms of how much energy one has to expel. Yeah.
In terms of what you're doing when you're not doing Fiddler, it feels like all of this has been reanimated, re-energized, partly by Fiddler. Just the people returning to it, wanting to explore it, wanting to kind of take it on. Can you talk a little bit about what you and Stephen have been doing in terms of Yiddish music?
Stephen and I have been meeting weekly. First, we did it over Zoom.
During the pandemic?
Yeah,
pandemic,
right at the beginning.
Learning songs. Stephen would say, can you just, I would show him, I gave him my mother's books, and I said, check out which texts speak to you. Look at the text and tell me about the text, and I'll play them for you, and we'll see if you like it. And that was the process.
Yeah.
So Stephen, you can read anything now?
Yiddish-wise?
Yeah.
Well, I can read it, but then I have to use a dictionary sometimes to help me. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but the thing that was the genesis for this was that as right before pandemic, people were asking me to come and sing in Yiddish, sing songs from Fiddler in Yiddish, but also sing Yiddish songs. And so Zalmen and I were going to do this, and I wanted
as a show, kind of a thing.
Just sort of, yeah, like
or a concert.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I was wary because I didn't want to. It's in Zalmen's bones, and in some ways the pandemic was a blessing because I had 2.5 years to really sit with these songs, as opposed to it's in 2 weeks and I need to figure out some songs. So it was a beautiful, slow process for Zalmen really to help me find some repertoire.
And for me, it was like, here are new eyes, this Shakespearean actor looking at this Yiddish and looking at this text and reintroducing songs that I've heard thousands of times. And I said, no, not that song again. And he wanted to do it, and I said, okay, let's hear what it is. And I was blown away because of the here's a new vision, a new look,
take.
a new take into this text, and
But it's not really
exciting.
new.
To
I mean,
me.
that's the thing that
for me.
that I just would find these songs, and they would be so interesting dramatically. They would be a character talking to an old friend that he just happens to run into. They'd be someone whose wife disappeared in the ghetto. I mean, really, the thing I love about Yiddish songs is they don't shy away from any human experience. So even as the shtetls are being set on fire, there's a song about it, you know.
And when I heard you, I was lucky enough to hear you sing a few songs. One of the things that struck me was the pathos of these, that it was very naked, a lot of these, you know, and I wouldn't have imagined in a way that the emotion would be right there.
Yeah.
When you think about the voices that you're kind of bringing back, I don't want to get all sort of crunchy about it, but it strikes me that you're bringing back writers, composers, voices, and stories that might otherwise have just been dead or buried.
Yeah.
Can you each speak to just what that, are you aware of that? I mean, obviously it's not alive if it's not alive today. You're not just doing something to kind of pay memorial in some sense, but
Right.
I think that my whole life's work is that, you know, my whole life's work is making sure that this culture, this you know, 1,000-year-old, you know, legacy that we have that people aren't aware of, is introduced to a world, to a new generations. To new generations that would not have necessarily heard it. So Fiddler, of course, is a great vehicle because of its popularity. But I'm always thinking about that generation before, the generations before, the writers. There's so many, the writers, the teachers. There's so many teachers of this culture throughout you know, the last 100 years since Jews came to America.
and I know it may be obvious to you, but for those who don't know, why did it stop? Why did it end?
Yiddish?
Yes.
Well, you know, as when the immigrants first came to America, it was English. They wanted to learn English. They wanted to assimilate. We know all the stories of people not.
They wanted their kids to speak English.
Right. And many immigrants chose not to speak Yiddish to their kids. They would speak Yiddish to themselves so the kids wouldn't understand. It took another generation for this whole new generation to say, okay, well, what is that language? What is that language that is so a part of New York culture, for sure, American Jewish culture in a certain way, and I think that interest grew. It started. That period of time. Remember, when Fiddler was created, it was 20 years after the Holocaust. So you had, you know, it was
So close.
Yeah, so close. But then comes another generation that really wants to know about that part. You know, that was completely separated from it. So of course, you know, now Yiddish being taught everywhere, klezmer.
It's hot.
Yeah.
Yiddish is
Everywhere.
hot.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that I definitely feel singing these songs with Zalmen, and I've never ever truly felt comfortable singing songs. You know, like doing an evening of song has never been my deal, and until now. I mean, now I and it is a bit of a calling, that is to say, I feel drawn to it personally, but also to serve it up, to give it life, to give it breath is so meaningful to me. I can't underestimate what that gives me. And then one of the things that Zalmen knows this is that if we do go on and present evenings after I would love to do it for the rest of my life, is sing Yiddish songs. Yeah. And I've now been in touch with some composers, and I've been reading Yiddish poetry and have been throwing poems their way, asking living modern composers, would you be interested in setting this to
Exciting.
music for me, and I've already gotten some
Wow.
back, and that to me feels again like a service to some of these poets. A lot of them are lady poets who are now finally making print, and they're being translated, and they somehow didn't quite make the circle of Yiddish poets from before, and I feel like it's doing them a service, and it's giving again musical life to these poems, and I'm just delighted to be sort of helping in any little way like that.
And are you comfortable just talking a little bit about your Daf Yomi practice? Because it feels like it's not an accident that is concurrent.
Well, no, I am comfortable. Of course, why wouldn't I be comfortable? I mean, don't
It's
ask me
Talmud.
anything. No, but it's just...
Sanhedrin 4B.
Yeah, no, we haven't gotten there yet. But it was my brother and I, who we learned Yiddish on the phone. My brother, Joseph Skybell, he's a novelist.
Wonderful novelist.
He said to me, because we ended, just as we were ending our run of Yiddish Fiddler, what coincided with the beginning of the new Daf Yomi cycle. And so he said, do you think it would be something that would interest you if we find out it's not for us, it's only a 7.5-year commitment? And so, so I started it, and I've stuck with it. It's almost, we will now almost have done it for 3 years, reading a page of Talmud a day. And again, it's not that I can say Yiddish Fiddler put me in the Talmud's track, but it all feels a piece, and I just love it. I really do love it. And as I've said, I love in the Yiddish version of Fiddler, because often in the Broadway version, no disrespect to the Broadway version, but there's only Mazel Tov and L'chaim are the only Yiddish that's in the Broadway version, and they refer to the good book. And that to me feels pretty antiseptic in terms of how a Jew would refer to the Torah. And in the Yiddish version, he talks about Midrash Rabbah and Targum Onkelos and all these Jewish sources that let me know that Tevye's got a little more learning than we may suspect he has. That he has no time to learn, but he has he's been taught things, and he has and Rashi, he knows these sources, and he cites them, maybe inaccurately, but he does cite them, and that to me also puts him grounded in reality.
So Zalmen, this can't really be easily replicated when we see how hard it is to do. Like, we want the Yiddish Fiddler to live on, but it's not like high schools can do it, right? I mean, where does it go?
Well, it is doable. I mean, it is doable. What we've seen, what we've proven is that with the right training, with the right preparation, with the right people being able to replicate it, it is doable. And I mean, it's our, we're hoping that we can tour this wherever, but the idea of other companies doing it is absolutely doable. I mean,
Exciting.
Yeah.
But is it like your voice? Are there recordings now for this, so that if any actor can get their part and hear it?
Well, we have recordings of myself and Muttel Didner saying the roles and singing the songs, so people could hear that.
We did do a recording.
Yes.
Right.
So
So
the
that
songs
people
are
can
available.
hear that. But in
Jackie
terms of all the lines and
no, I mean you mean like for rehearsal purposes for the high school version.
Yeah.
right. And what about non-Jews? Are there any non-Jews in your
plenty,
show?
Yes.
plenty.
Yeah.
Plenty.
Yeah.
And what has that been like for them? I mean, is that something you all talk about?
We haven't talked about it really, but it's I mean, you can speak more about with the company, but to me, I feel like they have learned, they've been shown a way into this culture in a way that they never possibly could have been before. And initially we gave them a lot of reading material and movies to watch to get them into to immerse in it, to see the original Tevye that was done, of
1939,
a Yiddish film of it. So we invited people to look at that, to look at this world. And I think, the non-Jews in the company are incredibly passionate, incredibly committed. I mean, as committed as anybody.
And there's been a marriage, right? A shidduch.
Yes, there was.
indeed.
Yes.
Was it Huddle?
It was
Huddle
Huddle
and
and Perchik.
Joel takes 100% credit for that.
That's kind of I mean, they have their romance.
That's it.
Did you go to the wedding?
Yes,
We did.
indeed.
We
The first
did.
time I was asked, who will we know at the wedding? And I was like, because usually like, who are we going to know at the wedding? Well, it was the first time where we knew most everybody at the wedding.
Did anybody do the bottle dance at the wedding?
I don't think so.
But on a more serious note, there is I think, a fear that a lot of actors have of being ethnic in some way and pigeonholing themselves. And when I was working on my first book, Stars of David, and I interviewed Dustin Hoffman and, even Sarah Jessica Parker, and there was just sort of a sense. I remember Natalie Portman saying, "I still want to be able to play the nun," But even not for even the Natalie Portmans, but for more of the Dustin Hoffman generation, there was a worry of being seen narrowly. He ultimately felt like he couldn't escape it, frankly, because he had a nose often associated with a Jewish person. But is it something you worry about, that your sort of public Jewishness is in some way going to limit your career?
No. I mean, not at all. And the truth is, in this time, not that you have to be Jewish to play Jewish, but I am Jewish, so I celebrate that. And I would, as I said, I would be happy to only play Jewish, but I also want to be respectful, because my first film role was as a young Catholic priest, So there was the
What
time.
was that?
It was Everybody Wins, Arthur Miller's last screenplay. But there was the time where Jewish people, Italian people, all of us types were kind of lumped as ethnic. And we could go this way or this way. And while that might still be true, I know that the world wants to be a little more...
authentic.
Yeah. And so, Jew's what I got, so I'm happy to be Jew.
And I was asking you before, but I'm going to ask you on camera. It feels like this is just such a fruitful, joyful symbiosis between the two of you, particularly.
Aww.
I want to know when you fight, like when.
We don't ever fight.
We have not fought.
No,
Not once.
Never.
There's no friction.
Never.
There's no disagreement.
No, I just say yes, Zalmen. Yes, Zalmen. I mean, I'm not dumb. I mean,
No, Stephen came to this with such a respect to the learning of it, and with such, and I have such I was so, and I continue to be in such awe of the talent and of the depth that he brings to the text, that there were never fights. There were always suggestions, and then he would often say, well, what about, I've been thinking about it this way, and I never thought about it that way. And I said, wow, sure, let's do it. And so it's been an exciting, process.
It's kind of, don't you feel a little bit like the universe had a little bit of a plan to toss you together? I mean...
I'm blessed. I'm blessed.
No, I'm blessed. I'm blessed.
No,
No,
Stephen has brought brings a newness. When you hear him do a program of Yiddish songs, you're not only hearing a singer, an actor doing it. You're going into a world, because he has this ability to take you to this world and put you in the context of whatever song, whatever story he's telling, and that's a gift.
Am I right, Zalmen, that at a certain point in your youth, you kind of thought, I'm not going to do this Yiddish thing. I'm not going to do what my parents did.
Yeah, there was definitely a point.
That didn't work out.
Yeah, that
Leonard
didn't work out.
Bernstein is the one who said, follow your Yiddish.
I went to music conservatories. I went to Juilliard. I studied with Bernstein and Tanglewood. And the story is that I was working with him, and we had a whole summer of.
Were you studying with him as a conductor?
As a conductor, I was a conductor. It was a conductor's workshop. There were like 30 of us from all over the world, and we spent the summer working with him and driving with him in his limousine, in his convertible from the Kusavitsi estate down to the shed at Tanglewood. And spending time, and after one performance I went backstage and he asked me, so what are you doing next year? So I said, I'm going to Juilliard, I'm studying conducting. So he said, what does the world need another Traviata conductor when you know your music better than anybody? So after thousands of hours on the therapist's couch working that out, thinking, oh my God, I'm listening. Listen to that, and it just rang true for me because.
So you kind of have him to thank.
I do.
And Stephen, finally, we're speaking when you just did Tevye in English at Chicago Lyric Opera.
Right.
And then you're going right into the Yiddish. Is your head a jumble? Do you worry about, did you ever in Chicago suddenly, flow into the Yiddish?
Well, I was concerned, and then the production in Chicago came from Berlin, and so there actually was a fair amount of Yiddish in the German production. So the director was like, so if you go into Yiddish, it won't be a problem. It's like, but I didn't, thankfully. What I'm experiencing now, and someone said I should write a book, because it is an unusual task to have one Tevye go from one vernacular to another language. We'll be in rehearsal, and it's been a while, so I'll be going to enter from there, and they're like, no, you enter from here, and I'm like, oh, because I entered from there in Chicago, and so I think there's a real brain thing that's interesting.
And am I right that you actually, I think Zalmen said that you walk off your part before you perform it, that you come to the theater early?
Well, I did. I mean,
in the beginning,
in the Yiddish, I definitely went through every word before the performance because
every performance, because
we were told back in the day that the Yiddish-speaking audience member would not have any qualm about correcting your Yiddish from their seat. So, and I knew that any little something that happens, it could be anything in the theater, can make you go up.
Yeah.
And so if you
go up means you lose your line.
Yeah. In Yiddish, I just wanted to make sure the Yiddish was
nailed,
as rock solid as it could be, so nothing could really derail it. So I can imagine I will probably do that as well, because the thing is, I don't spend all day, every day speaking Yiddish. So to go do the performance, I want to just get my tongue and brain back into a Yiddish frame.
Well, you should write that book, and then we'll have you back on.
Right.
Stephen Skybell, Zalmen Mlotek, thank you. You have given us a gift. You really have, both of you, and thank you for being here. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Thank you for joining us for In the Spotlight. I look forward to seeing you next time.